May 12, 1943. Northeast Tunisia. The desert wind carried the smell of burning oil and cordite as 22-year-old Gefreiter Horst Fascher lowered his rifle into the dust. All along the scrubby ridge where his Afrika Korps company had made its last stand, white cloths were rising like ghostly flags. The thunder of artillery had ceased. Only the sputtering cough of disabled half-tracks and the groans of wounded men broke the silence. The order had come down that morning: surrender. Rommel had been recalled months before, and his replacement, General Jürgen von Arnim, had capitulated. Nearly 250,000 German and Italian soldiers, the pride of the Desert Army, were now prisoners of the Allies. Horst, who had marched through Tripoli, watched comrades fall to British artillery at El Alamein, and endured months of supply shortages that reduced rations to thin soup and dry biscuits, felt an unfamiliar sensation as American MPs herded them together: relief. The war, at least for him, was finished. From the Tunisian hills, cattle trucks carried Fascher and hundreds of others westward to Oran, Algeria. Here, under a glaring Mediterranean sun, began the strange education that would transform him. American soldiers in clean khaki uniforms greeted the prisoners not with rifle butts, but with paperwork. Long tables stretched across the improvised reception yard. Each man was photographed. Identity cards were typed and laminated on machines many prisoners had never seen before. Horst remembered a sergeant addressing the crowd in fluent German. "You are prisoners of the United States Army. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Medical attention will be provided. Food will be provided. You are safe." The words, spoken without triumph or malice, stunned men who had been warned to expect brutality. Then came the medical checks: blood pressure, vaccinations, dental inspections. Horst flinched as a needle jabbed his arm. His Wehrmacht-issued health records had been a scribbled booklet. Here, clerks filed precise charts into cabinets. It was bureaucracy with a speed and efficiency that rivaled the German army at its height. But the first true shock came at the mess tent. The prisoners queued expecting thin soup or perhaps boiled beans. Instead, tin trays were piled high with white bread, fried eggs, and meat. 2 thick slices of beef, still steaming. A metal urn dispensed black coffee, rich with sugar and milk. Horst stared at the plate. He had eaten nothing resembling fresh meat in months. During the last weeks in Tunisia, rations had fallen to 200 grams of stale biscuit and ersatz coffee made from roasted barley. The Afrika Korps had grown gaunt. Some men collapsed from malnutrition before they ever reached the front. Now, as he chewed soft bread that melted in his mouth, Horst wrote silently in his mind, "If this is enemy captivity, then the Americans are not what Goebbels told us. If they can give this food to prisoners, what do they give their own soldiers?" By June 1943, Fascher was among 30,000 prisoners slated for transport to the United States. On the docks at Oran, he beheld the first Liberty ship he had ever seen. The SS Robert Rowan loomed above the quay, grey steel stretching seemingly forever, cranes swinging pallets of supplies into cavernous holds. Guards explained casually that such ships were built in weeks. Horst laughed at the exaggeration, until he later learned the Robert E. Peary had been constructed in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at a California shipyard. German propaganda would have dismissed such claims as impossible. Now he was boarding one. Below deck, prisoners were packed into converted troop spaces, but even here the abundance pressed against every sense. The ship's refrigeration kept milk cool and butter solid. Daily meals included white bread, potatoes, meat, and, astonishingly, fresh fruit. And then there was the moment that haunted him. On July 4th, the American crew celebrated Independence Day by serving ice cream, vanilla scooped into tin bowls, cold as alpine snow. Horst had not tasted ice cream since boyhood in Hamburg. He held the spoon in disbelief. The Americans made ice in the middle of the Atlantic, on a moving ship. That single frozen mouthful demolished years of speeches about decadent, collapsing America. Even more shocking was the waste. Buckets of peelings, half-eaten loaves, meat scraps were tossed overboard each day. Sailors drank coffee with sugar and casually discarded the dregs. Horst thought of his mother in Hamburg, boiling thin beet syrup to sweeten bitter rye bread. They throw away more in a day than my family has seen in a month. After 2 weeks at sea, the Liberty ship entered the vast sprawl of Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. What Horst saw on deck nearly buckled his knees. Cranes taller than church steeples swung loads of ammunition and vehicles with mechanical grace. Row upon row of cargo ships lined the docks, each larger than anything Hamburg could accommodate. Trucks rumbled in endless convoys, rail yards stretched to the horizon. Electric lights blazed from warehouses even in midday. In a single day, Horst later learned, Norfolk handled more tonnage than Hamburg managed in a week. The mathematics were merciless. Germany, once boasting of industrial might, was dwarfed by this single American port. As the prisoners marched to waiting trains, Horst noticed another detail more personal than statistics. Parking lots filled with automobiles, hundreds of them. Not party officials' limousines, not Wehrmacht staff cars, but workers' vehicles. Dock hands and crane operators owned their own cars, an unimaginable luxury in Germany, where the promised Volkswagen remained largely propaganda fantasy. Then came the final revelation of the crossing. The trains. Prisoners braced themselves for cattle cars like those that had carried them across Europe. Instead, they boarded gleaming Pullman passenger coaches. Upholstered seats folded into berths. Dining cars served chicken, vegetables, and pie on white tablecloths. Observation cars offered panoramic views of the Virginia countryside. One guard even apologized in German that the air conditioning was not functioning properly. Air conditioning. Horst had believed such comfort belonged only to Hitler's special train. For 3 days, the train rumbled through Virginia, Tennessee, and into Alabama. At night, Horst pressed his face to the glass. Every farmhouse glowed with electric light. Every town square blazed with neon signs. Factories churned at midnight, their parking lots filled with automobiles. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged cities into darkness for years. Here, electricity seemed infinite. Horst owned no paper. Censorship would have confiscated it, but he began writing a secret diary in memory, etching words into the recesses of his mind. Phrases repeated silently until they stuck. They have food for enemies. They waste sugar. Their trains are hotels. Their factories glow at night. Later, when he would finally put pen to paper, these first mental entries would return in exact detail. By the time the train slowed at Aliceville, Alabama, Horst Fascher was no longer a soldier of the Reich. He was a witness to something his homeland could neither imagine nor match, a society so abundant it could treat its prisoners better than Germany treated its citizens. The crossing was complete, not just across the Atlantic, but across the invisible gulf between ideology and reality. July 1943. The morning heat pressed heavy against the train windows as the long convoy of Pullman cars screeched to a halt in rural Alabama. Horst Fascher, face still pale from weeks at sea, stepped down onto wooden planks laid hastily across the red dust. Before him stretched Camp Aliceville, barbed wire, guard towers, and endless rows of barracks shimmering under the southern sun. But what struck him first was not the confinement, but the scale. It looked less like a prison than a small city built from scratch in the middle of cotton country. American MPs herded the new arrivals through the gates with clipped efficiency but without cruelty. "Schnell, schnell!" some guards barked in deliberate German, their accents comical, their tone oddly playful rather than threatening. The camp stretched over 400 acres, wide avenues between neat rows of wooden barracks, each topped with tin roofs glinting in the light. Horst counted the watchtowers, a dozen, maybe more, each with a guard behind a mounted machine gun. Yet the men in khaki looked relaxed, not tense. No snarling dogs, no beatings, no terror. Instead, a camp commandant greeted the prisoners with a translator at his side, explaining again that they would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Horst's assigned barracks, Block 27, held 24 men. The interior shocked him. Electric lights dangled from the ceiling. Wooden bunks were fitted with real mattresses, not straw sacks. Each prisoner received sheets, blankets, and even a pillow. A wood-burning stove promised warmth for the winter. Flush toilets and hot showers stood in the adjoining wash-house, luxuries absent from many German homes since 1940. Horst whispered to a comrade, "If this is defeat, then what is victory?" The camp mess hall became the next revelation. That first evening, Horst carried a metal tray down a line of steaming food containers. Pork chops, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cornbread, butter, and coffee. At the end of the line, a soldier plopped a slice of apple pie, golden crust still warm. The caloric intake, later calculated at 3,300 to 3,600 calories daily, exceeded what German civilians received in a week. Sugar bowls stood on every table. Horst sprinkled 2 heaping spoonfuls into his coffee, amazed that no guard stopped him. He remembered Berlin, where his mother carefully measured each ration card's 280 grams of sugar for the month. Here, sugar was free, casual, unlimited. The real astonishment came with the camp exchange, the PX store. American records show the quartermaster stocked it weekly with Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, Hershey bars, Wrigley's chewing gum, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and even ice cream when refrigeration allowed. Each prisoner earned 80 cents a day for labor, later raised to $1. With candy bars priced at 5 cents, a day's wages bought 16 bars, more chocolate than most German children had ever seen. Horst stared at the glass-fronted cooler packed with Coca-Cola bottles, condensation dripping in the July heat. He remembered American propaganda leaflets dropped in Tunisia, boasting of Coca-Cola. German officers had dismissed them as lies. Now he held one in his hand, the fizz biting his tongue, the sweetness exploding like a forbidden fruit. Coca-Cola became his symbol for the impossibility of America, a democratic abundance that defied Nazi logic. Life settled quickly into routine. Roll call at dawn, breakfast, then work details, maintaining camp gardens, repairing fences, or cleaning barracks. Afternoons offered recreation, soccer games, boxing, or music. Evenings brought lectures or films projected onto a white sheet, Gone with the Wind, Yankee Doodle Dandy, or newsreels of the Allied advance. For Horst, these films were more powerful than any lecture. He saw bustling American cities, neon signs, supermarkets filled with goods, and families smiling with plenty. Propaganda had painted America as chaotic, crime-ridden, and starving. The screen showed the opposite: order, prosperity, confidence. Aliceville became a paradoxical oasis of German culture in captivity. The camp housed artists, musicians, professors, captured intellectuals drafted into the Afrika Korps. Within months, they had organized orchestras, theatre groups, and even a camp newspaper. Horst, though not yet involved in music, listened spellbound to classical concerts performed with borrowed instruments. Beethoven and Brahms echoed across Alabama nights, blending strangely with the chirp of cicadas. Guards sometimes lingered outside to listen, tapping their feet softly. For Christmas, 1943, local churches sent packages: cookies, candy, knitted socks, even handwritten cards. Fascher read one aloud, struggling with the English. "Peace on earth, goodwill to all men." His comrades chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond to kindness from enemy civilians. Horst folded the card carefully, storing it like a relic. Every month prisoners could write letters home, 24 lines only, heavily censored. Horst tried to describe the abundance without breaking rules. "We have enough food," he wrote to his mother. "Do not worry." He dared not mention ice cream or Coca-Cola, but between the lines his family could read the truth. Their son was safe and well fed in enemy hands, while they scraped to survive in Hamburg. By late 1943, packages began flowing the other way. Prisoners used their camp wages to purchase goods and mail them to Germany: chocolate, instant coffee, canned meat. International Red Cross records confirm millions of such parcels crossed the Atlantic, a cruel reversal. POWs sending food to free civilians. Within weeks, Horst felt Nazi ideology loosening its grip. He remembered the speeches promising that America was decadent, racially divided, incapable of sacrifice. Yet here in Aliceville he saw something different. Abundance shared even with enemies. Sugar bowls left unattended. Guards chatting casually. No hierarchy of rations. The first time he bought ice cream at the PX, 10 cents for a sandwich, vanilla between 2 chocolate wafers, he tasted not just sweetness, but contradiction. In Hamburg, children had forgotten ice cream's taste. Here, even prisoners could have it on demand. That night, lying on his bunk under electric light, Horst began adding new entries to his secret diary. He repeated phrases silently until they etched themselves into memory. "They treat us with dignity. They feed us more than our families. They waste nothing but time. America is not weakness, it is strength." American officers monitoring morale noted the gradual transformation. The abundance of Aliceville was more persuasive than any pamphlet. Fascher felt it personally. The Reich had told him Germany fought for survival against decadent democracies. Yet democracy here fed him better than the fatherland ever had. The contradiction gnawed daily. Each Coca-Cola bottle, each slice of pie, each sugar cube was a lesson. Horst's diary grew. "We are prisoners, yet we are freer here than at home. The Reich gives us hunger, the Americans give us plenty. Which system is truly strong?" By the end of summer 1943, Horst Fascher had ceased to think of Aliceville as a prison camp. It was a strange laboratory of the impossible, a place where enemies became students of American abundance. He no longer measured days in weeks of captivity, but in revelations: the first Coca-Cola, the first Hershey bar, the first ice cream sandwich. Each taste was a fracture line in Nazi propaganda, spreading silently through his mind. And in the warm Alabama nights, as the camp orchestra played under the glow of electric lights, Horst realized he was not only surviving captivity, he was learning to live in a new world. September 1943. The Alabama heat began to soften into autumn, cotton fields stretching white across the horizon like snow drifts under a blazing sun. For Horst Fascher, now 3 months into captivity, the gates of Camp Aliceville opened not to freedom, but to something nearly as surprising: labor details. It was here, outside the barbed wire, that the real lessons began. American officers explained the arrangement through interpreters. Prisoners would work for wages, 80 cents per day, credited to their camp accounts, and in return, they would help ease America's wartime labor shortage. The Geneva Convention allowed this so long as the work was not directly military. Horst was skeptical. In Germany, forced labor meant cruelty, starvation, and whips. Yet when the trucks rumbled out of the gates toward sprawling farms, he found something entirely different: open fields, fresh air, and curious farmers who treated their captives more like hired hands than enemies. The first assignment was cotton picking. The Alabama farmers demonstrated how to strap long sacks over their shoulders and pull the fluffy bowls from thorny stems. The work was tedious, fingers pricked by sharp husks, but Horst marvelled at the sheer scale: acres upon acres of white cotton, stretching farther than the eye could see. In Germany, a field this large would have been divided among villages, harvested by hand for weeks. Here, he soon saw, machines did the work of armies. It was the cotton gin that shocked him most. The farmers invited prisoners to watch as the machine swallowed mountains of raw cotton, separating seed from fibre with brutal efficiency. Horst stood with mouth slightly open as tons were processed in hours. Later that week, he watched a combine harvester crawl across another farm. The great steel beast cut and threshed simultaneously, producing neat sacks of grain while moving faster than squads of labourers could keep pace. Horst whispered to a fellow prisoner, "If they have machines for everything, then how can they ever run out of food?" The contrast was stark. In North Africa, the Afrika Korps had begged villagers for scraps of bread. Supply trucks broke down for lack of spare parts. At home, farmers still used horses to plough. Here, even in rural Alabama, machines eliminated scarcity. Another shock came not from machines but from people. Many of the farms employed African American labourers, sharecroppers bound to cycles of poverty, yet still living with a dignity that contradicted Nazi dogma. Horst had been raised on propaganda depicting non-Europeans as inferior. Yet he watched black farmhands drive tractors, manage accounts, and negotiate contracts with white landowners. At times, prisoners worked alongside them in the fields. Though segregation laws barred close social contact, Horst sensed that reality was far more complex than the racial hierarchy drilled into him since childhood. One older worker, seeing Horst struggling with his cotton sack, laughed and called over in slow English, "Don't pull, twist and snap." The advice worked. Horst nodded thanks. The Reich had promised him mastery over such men. Instead, he was learning from them. The moment etched itself in his mental diary. Propaganda lies. These men are not what we were told. They are skilled, strong, respected. Our worldview is false. By October, Horst's labour detail shifted to orchards in southern Alabama. There he helped pick peaches destined for canneries. The sheer waste staggered him. Perfectly edible fruit with blemishes was thrown into piles for animal feed. "Too soft for market," the farmer explained. In Germany, a single bruised peach would have been cherished, cut carefully to salvage every morsel. Here, tons of fruit went unused. The canneries themselves revealed further wonders. Conveyor belts whisked fruit into automated washing, peeling, and sealing machines. Quality inspectors rejected entire crates for minor imperfections. Horst stared at barrels of sugar used in syrup production. In Hamburg, sugar was measured by the spoonful. Here it was poured by the pound. He scribbled silently in his memory diary. "They waste what we starve for. And yet their people are fat and strong. We cannot win against such wealth." One afternoon, prisoners were escorted past a local schoolyard during lunch hour. Children lined up with tin trays, receiving hot meals, beef stew, bread, vegetables, and, most astonishingly, small cartons of fresh milk. Horst stopped short. In Germany, children scrounged for potatoes, their growth stunted by malnutrition. Here, American children drank milk daily, served by uniformed cafeteria workers. Some even bought small cups of ice cream for pennies. Prison guards urged the prisoners onward, but Horst never forgot the sight. That evening in his barracks, he repeated the image to himself again and again. They feed their children better than our army. With his labour wages, Horst began buying goods from the Camp PX, chocolate bars, instant coffee, canned meat. He carefully packed them into parcels allowed by the Red Cross, addressed to his family in Hamburg. Weeks later, he received a censored letter from his mother, trembling with gratitude. "Your package has saved us. We tasted chocolate for the first time in years. Little Ursula would not believe it was real." The irony cut deep. A prisoner of war earning pennies in Alabama could send abundance to a family starving in Germany. The Reich had promised to feed its people through conquest. Instead, it was American democracy that fed German civilians through the hands of their captured sons. By late autumn, Horst no longer thought of the work details as labour, but as lessons. Every tractor, every refrigerated truck, every orchard filled with surplus fruit was a chapter in a textbook written in abundance. At night in Barracks 27, he reviewed his mental diary. Day 1, cotton gin. Day 5, combine. Day 12, peaches wasted. Day 20, children with milk. Day 30, family eats American chocolate while free Germans starve. The more he recorded, the more the structure of Nazi ideology collapsed. Strength was not scarcity nor sacrifice. Strength was creation, machines that multiplied labor, farms that produced surplus, factories that canned mountains of food. Yet confusion lingered. He saw African Americans forced to use separate facilities, buses divided by race, laws restricting their freedom. If America was so abundant, why did it deny equality to its own citizens? The contradiction gnawed at him. One black farmhand, catching his stare, said quietly, "Don't think it's paradise here, German boy." We got our own fights. The words puzzled Horst for weeks. How could a nation so powerful still be divided? Yet even with contradictions, the truth remained. America's abundance was real. Its machines worked, its children thrived, its farms overflowed. By the winter of 1943, Horst Fascher's captivity had turned into education. Each day outside, the wire expanded his secret diary. The Reich had promised victory through willpower and sacrifice. America revealed victory through production and efficiency. As the trucks rumbled back into Aliceville each evening, Horst no longer thought of himself as a prisoner. He was a witness, gathering evidence for a verdict that would echo long after the war. Abundance is stronger than ideology. In his bunk at night, he whispered the words silently to himself so they would not fade. They waste what we starve for. Their children drink milk. Their machines never stop. This is not weakness. This is power. December 1943. Frost glittered across the Alabama fields outside Camp Aliceville, the morning air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Inside the wire, German prisoners pulled jackets tighter, exhaling clouds of breath. Yet in the barracks, stoves glowed with steady heat, electric lights hummed overhead, and hot showers steamed in the washhouses. For Horst Fascher, the material comforts were already familiar. What he now discovered was something stranger, perhaps more dangerous to his old loyalties, a campaign of the mind. Aliceville was not merely a prison, it became a laboratory of German culture in exile. Among the thousands of Afrika Korps soldiers were teachers, musicians, actors and professors swept into uniform during the desperate years of the Reich. Deprived of weapons, they turned talents to survival. By late 1943, the camp boasted orchestras, theatre groups, choirs, and even a newspaper printed in German. Fascher remembered one night standing in the recreation hall as violins and clarinets filled the air with Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. The sound carried across the rows of barracks into the dark Alabama sky, mingling with the cry of distant owls. Guards leaned against walls, listening silently. For Fascher, raised in Hamburg with a love for music, the concerts awakened a part of himself dulled by years of war. He realized culture was not lost in captivity. It thrived, reshaped by circumstance. At first, the American Special Projects Division approached cautiously. Rather than forcing propaganda, they offered access: books, newspapers, and films. In December, German-language editions of Newsmap appeared in the barracks, showing brightly coloured charts of American production. Columns boasted 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola, 119 billion quarts of milk, 380 million pounds of chocolate. Some prisoners scoffed, muttering propaganda. But Horst compared the numbers to what he had witnessed on farms and in orchards. They matched. He began to trust the statistics. Films projected on white sheets delivered further shocks. Gone with the Wind dazzled prisoners unused to Hollywood's scale. The Grapes of Wrath, showing American poverty during the Depression, confused them. Why would a nation admit weakness on film? Yet to Horst, the message was clear. Americans did not fear truth. Even suffering could be displayed openly. Classes soon followed. Prisoners could enroll in English lessons taught by camp staff and even sympathetic guards. Horst, curious, joined. He struggled with grammar but discovered satisfaction in new words. Freedom, abundance, democracy. Each term carried weight that contradicted Nazi vocabulary drilled into him since youth. One instructor, a Methodist minister from Tuscaloosa, handed out copies of the U.S. Constitution in German translation. Horst read phrases slowly. "We the people, to secure the blessings of liberty." He whispered the words aloud at night, struck by their universality. In Germany, power flowed downward from Führer to Volk. In America, it seemed to flow upward, from ordinary people to government. The true turning point came with Christmas 1943. Snow did not fall in Alabama, but decorations sprouted anyway. Paper garlands, candles, and a small evergreen cut from nearby woods. Local church groups and civic organizations donated gifts, homemade cookies, candy, socks, even board games. Horst opened a small package to find gingerbread wrapped in wax paper, sent by a family in Birmingham who had lost a son fighting the Wehrmacht in Tunisia. The card read simply, "Peace to you, even in captivity." Horst sat for a long time staring at the handwriting. The Americans had every reason to hate him. Instead, they offered kindness. He thought of Goebbels' speeches about Anglo-American barbarity and realized they had evaporated like smoke in the Alabama wind. Perhaps the deepest impact came not from lectures or newspapers, but from music. On Sundays, local African-American choirs sometimes performed at the camp. They sang gospel hymns, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," "Go Down, Moses." Horst had never heard such rhythms. The voices rose and fell with power that defied his categories of serious or degenerate music. The harmonies seemed to carry both sorrow and joy. He felt gooseflesh on his arms. One evening he confessed to a bunkmate, "If this is the music of slaves, then freedom must be stronger than chains. They sing with more hope than we ever marched with." Those songs, blending pain with resilience, would echo in him long after war's end, shaping his post-war fascination with jazz and blues. As 1944 began, prisoners gained access to American newspapers under supervision. Horst devoured them. Headlines proclaimed American victories in the Pacific, staggering production figures, and photographs of factories churning out tanks and aircraft. At first he suspected exaggeration, but then came the newsreels, showing endless lines of Sherman tanks rolling off assembly lines, B-24 bombers filling the skies, Liberty ships sliding down slipways faster than Germany could sink them. He remembered standing on deck of the Robert Rowan, marvelling at one Liberty ship. Now he saw hundreds, thousands. The statistics were not propaganda. They were visible reality. Inside Barracks 27, discussions grew heated. Some prisoners clung to Nazism, forming secret groups that threatened others. But Horst found himself drifting toward a different circle, men who quietly admitted doubts. They debated after lights out, whispering about what they had seen: sugar bowls overflowing, children with milk, cars for dock workers, jazz choirs singing. One night, Horst summed it up. "If democracy is weakness, why does it feed even us? If dictatorship is strength, why are our families starving?" Silence followed. No one had an answer. By January 1944, Horst's secret mental diary had grown thick with phrases memorized like prayers. "They feed prisoners more than we fed soldiers. They let their children eat ice cream at school. They show their poor on film without fear. They give gifts at Christmas to enemies. Their music has more hope than our speeches." Each phrase was a fracture line in the wall of Nazi belief. Winter turned to spring. The orchards around Aliceville budded again, and Horst continued his work details. But something fundamental had changed. He no longer measured captivity in days until repatriation. Instead, he measured it in revelations, new words, new music, new ideas. The Special Projects Division had not re-educated him with lectures. Abundance had done the work. Culture and kindness completed it. By 1944, Horst Fascher was no longer a soldier of the Reich in thought. He was a witness to a different kind of power, one built not on fear, but on freedom. In his mental diary, he wrote the phrase that would guide the rest of his captivity. Every meal, every song, every word of English is a lesson. And the lesson is this: democracy feeds even its enemies. Spring 1944. The Alabama air grew heavy with humidity, and inside Camp Aliceville, the cycle of days continued with mechanical precision: roll call, meals, work details, recreation. Yet beneath the surface, something deeper was happening. For Horst Fascher and thousands of fellow prisoners, the greatest revelation of captivity was not the barbed wire, nor even the music and lectures of re-education. It was food. Food became the weapon that Nazi propaganda could not resist, the silent argument that shattered ideology more thoroughly than leaflets or speeches. Each meal tray, each Coca-Cola bottle, each Hershey bar was a message written in sugar and abundance. America was strong, not weak, prosperous, not decadent, and it proved it not with words, but with calories. American quartermaster records show that prisoners at Aliceville received between 3,300 and 3,600 calories per day. The menu rotated with almost luxurious consistency: bacon and eggs, pancakes with syrup, roast beef, chicken, fresh vegetables, fruit, pies, and coffee with cream and sugar. For Horst, each breakfast was a reminder of the contrast. In Tunisia, he had scraped his mess tin for crumbs of black bread, gnawed on canned horse meat, and endured weeks where ersatz coffee was the only warm drink. Now, as he spread butter across soft white bread and sprinkled sugar into steaming coffee, he thought bitterly of his family in Hamburg, rationing thin slices of turnip. The most surreal detail was the sugar bowl. Each long mess table held a communal bowl heaped with refined white sugar. Prisoners could use as much as they wished. No guard counted spoonfuls. No clerk stamped ration cards. Horst remembered German civilians allotted 280 grams of sugar per month, often unavailable. Here, sugar sat freely, replenished weekly in 100-pound sacks. One afternoon, humid air hardened several hundred pounds of sugar into solid lumps. Kitchen staff simply dumped it into trash bins and requisitioned more. Horst, working in the kitchen detail that day, felt a knot in his stomach. "We would have steamed it, scraped it, used every grain," he whispered to a fellow prisoner. The Americans threw it away without thought. The PX continued its role as the camp's true ideological battlefield. For 5 cents, a prisoner could purchase a Hershey bar or bottle of Coca-Cola. The supply was constant. Delivery trucks unloaded crates weekly, each filled with hundreds of bottles still cold with condensation. Horst quickly became a regular customer. He discovered Americans had brand preferences, some favoring Hershey, others Nestlé, still others Mars bars. They debated flavors, casually discarding half-eaten candy when a new shipment arrived. For a German soldier raised in a land where chocolate was a rare treasure, the abundance felt hallucinatory. Coca-Cola became his obsession. Its fizzing sweetness embodied America's casual prosperity. At home, he knew, such luxuries were restricted even for party officials. Yet here, even prisoners drank what civilians in Germany only dreamed of. The taste became memory and metaphor. Democracy fizzed, sweet and effervescent, while the Reich tasted of stale bread and ersatz coffee. By summer 1944, ice cream had become routine in the camp. Refrigerated trucks delivered tubs of vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. Prisoners could buy ice cream sandwiches or cups for 10 cents. Larger celebrations produced entire barrels churned by hand. At first, Horst refused to believe it. Ice cream had disappeared from German life by 1940, cream diverted to butter rations, sugar scarce. Now, under Alabama heat, he spooned cold sweetness into his mouth as though in a dream. He recalled one July afternoon when the PX unveiled butter pecan flavour, a variety more extravagant than anything he had tasted even in Hamburg before the war. Horst wrote silently in his memory diary, "They give ice cream to prisoners while German children starve. What kind of strength allows such waste?" Monthly, the International Red Cross delivered packages to prisoners, each a miracle of abundance: chocolate bars, instant coffee, canned meat, processed cheese, soap and cigarettes. These supplements were distributed on top of regular rations. The prisoners quickly discovered another surreal reversal. They could send parcels home, using their camp wages to buy goods for their families. Horst mailed chocolate, coffee, and canned goods to Hamburg. Weeks later, a letter arrived from his mother. "Your package saved us." Ursula cried when she tasted chocolate. "We never believed we would see it again." Horst felt the irony cut like a knife. A prisoner of war fed his family while his free fatherland left them to hunger. The Americans insisted on holidays. In November 1943, Horst had experienced his first American Thanksgiving: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, and coffee. Now, a year later, the memory remained vivid. The logistics staggered him. Turkey dinners for hundreds of thousands of prisoners, prepared simultaneously across dozens of camps. It was a feat of organization greater than most German offensives. That the Americans extended the holiday meal even to enemies broke every assumption. At night, Horst whispered into his diary, "We are not treated as conquered men, but as equals at their table." The Reich lied. By mid-1944, the effects were measurable. American monitors noted weight gain among prisoners, improved health, and, most tellingly, the erosion of Nazi loyalty. Letters intercepted by censors revealed disbelief among German families who received American goods from imprisoned sons. Horst felt the collapse inside himself. His loyalty to the Reich withered not from defeat in battle, but from abundance on the plate. If dictatorship cannot feed its soldiers, and democracy feeds even its enemies, which system is stronger? He asked one night in Barracks 27. No one answered. Beyond calories, food symbolized ideology. Every sugar bowl was proof of industrial might. Every Coca-Cola bottle was evidence of distribution networks. Every ice cream scoop was testimony to refrigeration and logistics. Horst realized that German sacrifice had not been noble, it had been needless. The Reich's hunger was not the price of strength, but the symptom of weakness. The Americans, with their pies and candy bars, had already won the argument. In July 1944, newsreels showed American troops distributing chocolate and gum to French children after D-Day. The prisoners watched in silence. Horst felt tears rise. American soldiers advancing into Europe carried enough candy to give away. Germany could not feed its own people. He added a final line to his secret diary that night. "We believed we were the master race. Yet we are fed as captives while our people starve free. This is the Reich's greatest defeat." By the end of 1944, the transformation was complete. Horst Fascher had not been broken by interrogation, nor converted by propaganda. He had been re-educated by abundance. The Reich had promised glory through hunger. America proved strength through plenty. The collapse of ideology came not with speeches, but with sugar, chocolate, ice cream, and the casual generosity of a society wealthy enough to share luxuries with enemies. For Fascher, every bite was a lesson. By winter's end, he no longer saw himself as a prisoner of war, but as a student of democracy's most persuasive weapon, the mathematics of food. By 1944, Camp Aliceville was no longer the entire world for Horst Fascher. Through work details, guarded excursions, and glimpses of American daily life, He and thousands of fellow prisoners began to see beyond the fences. What they encountered outside, schools, farms, diners, churches, factories, contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had promised them about a decadent, divided America. These encounters did more to dismantle ideology than any lecture. As labour shortages deepened across the United States, German prisoners became a vital workforce. By 1944, nearly 100,000 POWs were working in agriculture, lumber, and food processing. Aliceville's men were dispatched to cotton fields, canneries, and orchards across Alabama and neighbouring states. For Horst, the first trip beyond the wire felt surreal. Guards carried rifles, but the mood was almost casual. Farmers greeted them with a nod, sometimes even with a smile. The work was hard, but food was plentiful. At noon, baskets appeared with sandwiches, fruit, and milk. Farmers often shared their own lunches, an act of generosity that unsettled Horst more than anger ever could. One day in autumn 1944, Horst's work detail passed an elementary school at lunchtime. Children lined up with tin trays, receiving hot meals, meat stew, bread, vegetables, and astonishingly small cartons of fresh milk. Horst froze. In Hamburg, his sister Ursula stood in ration lines for hours, clutching coupons for watery potatoes. German children grew thin, stunted by lack of protein. Here, American children drank milk every day. Some even bought small cups of ice cream for pennies. The image seared itself into his memory. That night in Barracks 27, he repeated it silently into his mental diary. They give ice cream to children while our families starve. This is not weakness. This is power. Occasionally, minimum security prisoners were escorted into small towns to perform repair work. In one such instance, a group including Horst ate lunch under guard in a local diner. The experience shattered another layer of propaganda. Menus offered hamburgers for 25 cents, Coca-Cola for 5, pie slices for 15. Horst noticed that a factory worker and a man in a suit ate side by side at the counter, served by the same waitress, paying the same price. In Germany, social rank defined every interaction. Here, equality appeared not as theory, but as daily practice. Horst scribbled silently into his mind. A banker and a labourer eat the same meal. This is democracy. Yet not all encounters were revelations of equality. Alabama in the 1940s was a Jim Crow state where African Americans lived under strict segregation. Horst noticed coloured signs above separate restrooms and water fountains. On buses, black passengers sat in the back. The contradiction gnawed at him. How could a society so abundant deny equality to its own citizens? He remembered working alongside African American sharecroppers who taught him how to pick cotton efficiently. They were skilled and capable, yet denied basic rights. One labourer, seeing Horst's confusion, muttered, "Don't think it's paradise here, German boy. We got our own fights." The words stayed with Horst. Even America, for all its plenty, had unfinished work. Another revelation came through labour in food processing plants. Horst watched canning lines where peaches, beans and corn rolled along conveyor belts into gleaming tins. Entire crates of fruit were discarded for blemishes too small to matter in Germany. He remembered one overseer casually remarking, 15% gets rejected, usually goes to animal feed. Horst nearly laughed aloud. In Hamburg, that rejected food would have been a feast. The prisoners also observed machinery Germany could not match. Sugar beet processing plants in the Midwest produced more sugar than entire German regions. Refrigerated trucks delivered fresh produce hundreds of miles away, something unimaginable under German shortages. Horst added another line to his mental diary. They build machines to save labour, not men to replace machines. This is why they waste nothing but time. Through organised visits, POWs sometimes attended local church services. Horst heard gospel choirs in small Alabama churches, their voices rising in hymns that blended sorrow and hope. To his ears, trained on Beethoven and Brahms, it was shocking and beautiful. Later, he confided to a fellow prisoner, "If this is the music of slaves, then freedom must be stronger than chains. They sing with more hope than we ever marched with the rhythms, born from oppression, carried a vitality that Nazi marches lacked." Back in the camp, orchestras played Brahms, while outside, radios blared swing and jazz. Horst found himself humming syncopated rhythms. A seed had been planted, one that would flower after the war, when music became his bridge to a new world. By 1944, prisoners gained broader access to American newspapers. Horst read articles boasting of production, 7 million tons of sugar, 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola, 500 million gallons of ice cream annually. The numbers dwarfed Germany's entire output. At first he thought them exaggerated, but his own eyes had confirmed them. Orchards, canneries, sugar piles, ice cream served in camp. The statistics were not propaganda. They were fact. Yet those same newspapers also reported racial violence, strikes, and political disputes. Horst marveled. Americans did not hide their flaws. They argued openly, criticized leaders in print, admitted mistakes. In Germany, such honesty would mean arrest. He scribbled silently into his diary, "They are not perfect, but they are free to say so." That is the difference. The more Horst saw of America, the heavier the contradiction grew. Nazi propaganda had promised a decadent, weak society doomed to collapse under strain. Instead, he saw a nation wealthy enough to feed children milk, allow labourers to eat beside bankers, and provide ice cream even to prisoners. The effect was devastating. Many prisoners sank into quiet depression, realizing their families starved while they gained weight in captivity. Some wept when letters confirmed children in Germany had not tasted butter in years. For Horst, the revelation came with a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. He felt guilt that he ate ice cream while Ursula starved, but gratitude, too, that he had survived to witness a world beyond lies. By early 1945, as war news turned grim, Allied forces advancing in France, Soviet armies pushing toward Berlin, Horst carried with him not only the shame of defeat, but the clarity of discovery. He had seen America not as an abstraction, but as a daily reality. Sugar bowls on mess hall tables, milk for school children, gospel choirs in country churches, hamburger diners serving all classes equally. He had also seen its contradictions: segregation, inequality, unfinished struggles. Yet the verdict was unavoidable. Democracy, for all its flaws, produced abundance. Dictatorship, for all its promises, produced only hunger. As the train carried him back from a work detail one evening, Horst pressed his forehead to the glass, watching neon signs glow in a small Alabama town. His mental diary etched another phrase that would last the rest of his life. "We were taught to fight for a master race. Instead, we learned that true strength is a nation where even children eat better than soldiers. That is the lesson America teaches." April 1945. The barracks at Camp Aliceville buzzed with rumours. Prisoners huddled around bulletin boards where American newspapers, delivered under guard, carried headlines too vast to ignore. "Russians enter Berlin." "Hitler reported dead." "Germany surrenders unconditionally." For Horst Fascher, who had crossed the Atlantic 2 years earlier in captivity, the war that had defined his youth was suddenly finished. Yet the end brought not clarity, but confusion, and a deep reckoning with everything he had seen and tasted in America. On May 8, 1945, guards announced the official German surrender. Some prisoners cheered quietly, others wept. A small minority flew into rages, shouting that surrender was betrayal. But for most, the news confirmed what their stomachs had already told them for months. The Reich had collapsed not just militarily, but morally and materially. Horst felt the weight of memory pressing in. He thought of Coca-Cola bottles sweating with condensation in Alabama heat. He thought of ice cream scoops melting under July sun. He thought of sugar bowls refilled endlessly, of American schoolchildren drinking milk while Ursula in Hamburg boiled thin soup. Germany had lost long before surrender. Its failure was written in hunger. By summer 1945, Red Cross reports confirmed what prisoners already knew. Many had gained weight in captivity. Medical inspections at Aliceville showed improved health, strong muscles, even rosy cheeks. Letters from home when they arrived painted the opposite. Families thin, rationing reduced to almost nothing, bread stretched with sawdust filler. Horst once received a letter from his mother. "Your father has lost weight. Ursula faints often, but your parcels are treasures." The chocolate brought her back to life for a week. He read the words in silence, unable to reconcile them with the apple pie cooling in the camp kitchen. The guilt gnawed deeper than barbed wire ever could. He was healthier as a prisoner than his family was in freedom. Between 1943 and 1946, German prisoners in America mailed over 11 million parcels back home. Horst joined the steady stream, buying canned meat, chocolate, and coffee with his camp wages. Each package became a lifeline across the Atlantic, a reversal so surreal that it bordered on absurd. Prisoners feeding civilians, captives sending salvation to the free. Every time Horst tied a box closed, he thought of Goebbels' speeches promising Germany would plunder abundance from conquered lands. Instead, it was democracy that shipped gifts to starving families through the hands of captured soldiers. Summer 1945 brought another wave of revelation. Newsreels shown in Aliceville displayed not only victory parades, but also the liberation of concentration camps. The skeletal survivors of Buchenwald and Dachau stared from the screen with hollow eyes. Horst watched in stunned silence. He had not known. Most prisoners had not. Nazi propaganda had spoken of relocations, work camps. Now the truth flickered in black and white. Piles of corpses, barbed wire, ovens. Some prisoners turned away, refusing to believe. Others shouted that the films were faked. But Horst remembered sugar bowls, ice cream, chocolate, and he knew abundance did not lie. If the Americans showed this, it was because it had happened. The Reich had not only starved its people, it had murdered millions. That night he whispered another line into his mental diary. Our strength was built on lies. Their strength is built on truth. The war was over, but captivity continued. With millions of prisoners across the globe, the United States faced a logistical puzzle. Aliceville remained full through 1945, its orchards ripening again, its PX stocked with chocolate, its mess hall serving turkey at Thanksgiving as though nothing had changed. Prisoners grew restless. Some feared they would never return. Others dreaded returning to ruins. Letters from Germany confirmed cities reduced to rubble, railways shattered, food supply broken. Hamburg, Horst learned, had been bombed into firestorms. His family had survived, but barely. In late 1945, word spread. Repatriation would begin. Horst felt torn. He longed for home, yet feared what awaited. And part of him hesitated to leave the land that had fed him, clothed him, and shown him abundance beyond imagining. In January 1946, Horst boarded a train under guard. But unlike the cattle cars of German transport, these were Pullman coaches again, cushioned seats, hot meals in dining cars, observation windows framing the American countryside one last time. At Norfolk, Virginia, he saw once more the endless cranes, Liberty ships and convoys. The scales still dwarfed anything Germany had ever built. Even in victory, America continued to overflow. On the Liberty ship carrying him eastward, prisoners ate meat, vegetables, bread, fruit, and astonishingly, ice cream once again, cold and sweet in the middle of the Atlantic. Horst stared at the spoon. knowing this might be the last ice cream he would taste for years. In March 1946, Horst stepped off a train into the ruins of Hamburg. Smoke still rose from bombed-out districts. Children with hollow cheeks begged on street corners. His mother clutched him in tears, thinner than he remembered, hair gone grey. Ursula was nearly unrecognizable, grown tall but frail, her bones visible through her dress. When Horst handed her a final Red Cross parcel of chocolate and canned meat, she cried as though it were treasure. For her, it was. Horst felt the collapse inside. He had left a Reich that promised abundance through conquest and returned to a homeland of rubble and starvation. The contrast with America, sugar bowls, Coca-Cola, milk for children, burned more painfully than defeat itself. In the months that followed, former POWs like Horst spoke quietly among neighbours. They described America not as propaganda had painted it, but as they had lived it. Ice cream for prisoners, chocolate for children, cars for workers, sugar without ration cards. At first, many Germans dismissed the stories as fantasy. But as the Marshall Plan arrived in 1947, with American food shipments filling kitchens once again, the truth became undeniable. Horst's testimony, like that of thousands of POWs, helped prepare Germany to accept American aid. He told anyone who would listen, "They defeated us not only with weapons but with food. They fed their enemies better than we fed our families. That is their strength." By 1946, Horst Fascher's captivity was over, but its lessons remained. The war had taught him hunger. America had taught him abundance. His mental diary, etched over 3 years in captivity, closed with a final entry as he walked Hamburg's broken streets. "We marched for conquest and found starvation. We surrendered and found ice cream. We believed dictatorship gave strength, but democracy gave plenty. This is the truth I carry home. The Reich is dead, but the memory of sugar bowls in Alabama lives.